Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Today I've come to the other side of Yorkshire, the western bit. Compared to East Yorkshire, it's a bit more industrial with ties to the coal, iron ore and wool industries, and contained within are some of the country's crappiest cities. Looking at you, Wakefield, of course I'll be doing my best to avoid such places as we take a journey from Pontefract to Wetherby. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period-correct maps, and kids and grown-ups love it so. The happy world of Haribo, which turns out is in Pontefract. Not a town known for being a happy world, but it is what it is. In the days of my guidebook, Pontefract was a fairly busy market town with around 16,000 residents, many of whom would have worked within the confectionery industry because Pontefract was a world leader in licorice production, and indeed the town gives its name to a famous sweet known as the Pontefract cake, which is basically a small disc of licorice. Originally they were sold as medicinal lozenges, with records suggesting they were being consumed as early as the 1600s, but in 1760 Dunhill Confectionery would add sugar to the recipe, creating the Pontefract cake sweet, which remains incredibly popular. Haribo would come to Pontefract in the 1970s after purchasing Dunhill Confectionery, and whilst their operations have expanded to other places, they're still making the same Pontefract cake in the same Pontefract factory. Just so you don't make the same mistake that I did, these receptacles around the town with Haribo printed on them do not contain Haribo. Don't eat the contents. Yes, I f***ing know, you bellends. How do I get in? Perhaps surprisingly, my guidebook doesn't mention Haribo, but it does suggest that we visit Pontefract's castle ruins, and we will because they're not owned by the National Trust or English Heritage, meaning it's free to get in. Well done to the local council. The castle was built in around 1070 and lasted up until the 1600s, at which point civil war broke out, but it would actually be after all of that the castle was demolished and made a ruin. After 500 years or so of Pontefract Castle and the town being a target for enemies and pillagers, the residents had all had enough and signed a petition for the castle to be demolished. You can't be invaded if there's nothing to invade, and the petition was a success, with an order given by Parliament to demolish the castle in 1649. Interestingly though, today the castle lives on. If you take a look at a Pontefract cake, you might notice an image of a castle on it. It's this one. Somebody is getting paid to count insects. Isn't that fantastic? 12 worms, guys, just so you know. 12. Just to the north of Pontefract is a town called Castleford, and whilst it is listed in my guidebook, it doesn't mention anything of interest for us to see or do. But with a population of over 24,000, back in the day the town must have been doing something, probably related to this. Castleford was a coal town. In the 1800s, the town saw rapid expansion from 1,000 to over 14,000 residents as various collieries opened up in the area. One such colliery was Welldale Colliery, which operated for 119 years between 1868 and 1987, employing a large number of Castleford's residents who would produce around 400,000 tonnes of coal every year. Sadly, in 1923, the same year as my guidebook's publication, an accidental explosion occurred at the mine where small charges used to break down the coalface ignited an area of fire damp, which is a mix of highly flammable gases found in coal mines, and unfortunately on that day, the whole thing exploded. 9 miners lost their lives, and one of them was actually a miner at 14 years old. Oh, you kids today don't know how lucky you are. Let's head off to our next destination, and to get there we'll be needing the A655 according to our old maps, and whilst parts of it have been rerouted, we can still follow the period-correct route, except for situations where roundabouts have been added. Like these ones. But what interests me here is the road bridge and what I think is an abandoned road underneath. I just happened to stumble across it on Google Maps, as you do, and this is one of those situations where it raises more questions than it does answers. What was this road used for? Looking at some older maps, it doesn't exist, so okay, maybe it's a more modern addition, but then why would you build it to only abandon it a short while after? Nothing here makes any sense, but if you've got any ideas, let me know. The Grand Old Duke of York, I don't know if you heard, but he had approximately 10,000 men, which he marched to the top of a hill before marching them down again. A complete waste of time, but have you ever wondered where that hill is? Well, wonder no more, because it's here at Sandal Castle, as recommended by my guidebook and found in Wakefield, but on the outskirts so I can avoid going into the centre of Wakefield. Sandal Castle was built sometime in the late 1200s. Today, nothing more than a ruin, but it's said that the famous nursery rhyme was written about Sandal Castle and more specifically the Battle of Wakefield that occurred in 1460 during the War of the Roses. Richard, the Grand Old Duke of York, saw conflict here with his Lancastrian opponents and, spoiler alert, it didn't work out so well for Richard and he met his end here at Sandal Castle. Still, he did get a nursery rhyme written about him, so every cloud. Whilst Wakefield and the surrounding areas are well known for coal and its associated industries, it's also considered the capital of the rhubarb triangle, an area in the north of England that for hundreds of years has been growing rhubarb from large purpose-built farms like this one to the north of Wakefield in a place called Rothwell. Rhubarb is grown using a technique that was developed in the UK in the early 1800s known as forcing. You cover a rhubarb crown with a pot and a lid which limits the light, and then the rhubarb stem will grow and stretch upwards in the search of light, giving us a larger and more tender rhubarb stem. And very few do it better than the Old Royd's rhubarb farm, which was set up in 1930, and ever since they've been perfecting the art of growing rhubarb, not with a forcing pot but with large sheds and coverings built for the same purpose. And just like that, we've avoided Wakefield successfully. From here we're going to head along the A642 towards Barwick and Elmet. We'll come back to the name. And before we get there, we pass through the village of Swillington. There isn't much going on, but there are the remains of some old industry, which I thought might be interesting. Between Swillington and Garthorpe was once situated Swillington Brickworks. It opened in 1952 because the company that built it had exhausted their clay supplies at another brickworks a short distance from here in Woodlesford. At its peak in the 1980s, they were making over 100,000 bricks a day, and to do so they used a tunnel kiln, a technology that was largely developed here at Swillington. In simple terms, you put bricks that are ready for firing at one end of a tunnel and a conveyor moves them through a series of kilns, and by the end you've got a brick that's good to go. It's a much quicker and more efficient way of doing things compared to the older methods of manually loading bricks into an individual kiln. The brickworks would operate up until 2008, at which point the then site owners Hanson decided to mothball the site, but I think that might be the wrong term because it would appear to me that the site has been completely demolished. A short distance away is the village of Barwick in Elmet, which means barley field in the kingdom of Elmet, which existed in the 4th century. Despite being a kingdom, the village doesn't get a mention in my guidebook, and yeah, that's fair enough, there's nothing of interest here. Except for the amazing Barwick maypole, which stands at 26 metres tall, providing a significant landmark for the villagers. If you're not familiar with a maypole, they're used for pole dancing. Sorry, not that sort. Maypole dancing is a traditional folk dance and a lot less exciting. Interestingly though, it seems that nobody is sure of the exact age or origins of the maypole here at Barwick. Some records suggest that there's been a maypole of sorts here since the 1600s, but nobody knows for sure or why. We're going to make our way towards Wetherby now, which requires a bit of meandering to stay on the old route, but we'll manage. Before we get there though, I want to make a quick stop to look at an industrial estate. Yes, for the second week in a row. There's just something about an industrial estate, don't you think? Especially at the Thorpe Arch Industrial and Retail Estate, which is just odd. This used to be a shop built into what used to be an ammunition storage bunker, which was part of a larger ammunition manufacturing site set up to supply the Ministry of Defence during the Second Small Disagreement of 1939 to 1945. Operating across 619 buildings, workers would make things like mortar shells, bullets and mines for the Army and the Royal Air Force, which at the time were exceedingly popular products for some reason. Behind me is a DFS sofa store, which is interesting because when it was open, the retail store was split into two different sections within two different underground bunkers connected with a covered walkway. Like I said, it's all very strange. Not the case in Wetherby though, which is as ordinary as it comes. It's a market town that in the days of my guidebook had around 2,000 residents, and I run out of things to tell you, but here's a bridge. Wetherby Bridge is a scheduled monument and grade listed structure, meaning in modern times it's nothing but a pain in the arse and things would be better if it was replaced. It used to carry the A1 or the Great North Road in the times when that was indeed a great road, but since the A1M came along to bypass the town, it's just carrying the A661. There's been a bridge here since the 13th century, but the bridge we see today was built in the 17th century and then widened in 1773 and then again in 1826. A quick look underneath the bridge reveals some of the original 17th century structure, giving us an idea as to how the bridge was widened. An unexpected resident, if you will, of Wetherby was the Royal Navy, who I suppose set up the Royal Air Force equivalent of an airfield in the sea, known as a stone frigate. This is an onshore establishment that involves no boats at all, and instead it was used for supply storage and workforce training. It operated between 1944 and 1958, after which parts of the site would become a young offenders institute, and it's now all been turned into a secondary school. However, I believe these two buildings are surviving examples of the original stone frigate site. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'd be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care. Bye-bye. Get a car.